Hi there, everybody. Welcome to episode 268 of The Art of Procurement. I'm your host, Philip Ideson, and as every week, I want to thank you so much for joining me today and listening to the pod. So if we were to describe a CPO that was focused on emotional intelligence and self-empowerment, self-possession, where would you guess that he or she worked? Maybe it's at a lifestyle brand or a Silicon Valley startup, but it would probably take a few hundred guesses to come up with the National Basketball Association or the NBA. Well, in this week's podcast, I'm really thrilled to be joined by Joe Postiglione. Joe is the CPO of the NBA. He's an author and he's an executive coach. So Joe is a certified empowerment coach and a certified emotional intelligence coach, which brings with it a non-traditional approach to procurement leadership. So after leaving his supply chain focused career in big consulting, Joe became an entrepreneurial executive coach, but now he supports all of the leagues, the teams, the owners that form the NBA. I've previously facilitated an event panel with Joe, and I'm really looking forward to sharing our conversation with you. It's all about the power of positive thinking and how that manifests itself into Joe's approach to leading procurement organizations and leading teams. Now, before I go into the interview, I do want to thank Tradove for their support of Procurement Thought Leadership and for sponsoring this episode of Art of Procurement. So Tradove eliminates pain points for both buyers and sellers. So whether that's purchasing urgency, unaligned buying and selling processes, lack of communication and transparency within their own teams, and difficulties discovering new suppliers. One of the things that you can do with Tradove is actually build your own private network or community portal for free. And I'm really excited to let you know that we're actually creating a private group just for Art of Procurement listeners within Tradove. So we'll post the podcasts and articles that we come across that we think will really help you on your journey to elevate the impact of procurement. And we'll try and drive some discussion amongst Art of Procurement listeners within the community around those topics. So all you need to do to join the Art of Procurement private network within Tradove is go to artofprocurement.com/Tradove. You can click on the Join for Free button that you'll see at the top of the screen, and on logging in, you'll be directed to a page to request access to the Art of Procurement private community. Once you do that, we'll get the notification and we'll let you in. So it'd be great to see you in Tradove and to engage really with other Art of Procurement listeners. As a reminder to do that, to sign up for an account, you go to artofprocurement.com/Tradove. Okay, well, with that being said, let's go straight into my conversation then with Joe. And I start by asking him, as I always do, if he found procurement or if procurement found him.
In the beginning, actually, procurement actually found me. I was an inventory analyst for MRO materials at a large pharma company and began to work with purchasing on the reorder points, et cetera. And I was hooked. And at the time, I was an accounting major person because math and numbers was always something I enjoyed and was good at. So I actually became hooked on the process of understanding what someone's needs are from an inventory point of view and how they actually contracted for them. Mm-hmm. And really since that point, I've gone through, the changes and have been an expediter, a buyer, a purchasing agent, supervisor, manager, director, VP, and now, as a CPO. So I actually saw it from the very inner workings of it and how it worked with, stakeholders and all the way through. So I really got hooked on it after that.
So as you've been through a career in procurement, I think it's when we're inside procurement, we sometimes look at change and think change has been slow. I mean, has that been your perspective, or have you found that, the last 10 years or so, we've really kind of professionalized as a profession and we're really going in a different direction from perhaps where the heritage of procurement is?
Yeah, I think without a doubt that's true. And I think for me, because of the different aspect and perspective I bring to it from a mindfulness and a win-win scenario as opposed to a win-lose scenario, I've certainly evolved in a much different direction than I had found with my peers and colleagues in the past. Although today, as you say, I think there's a closer alignment with being more than just someone that squeezes and brings some savings and value to the table. So I see that the function and the profession itself has evolved considerably, and not necessarily along the same lines as I have, but my path has been different than most.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you talked about your approach and focus on win-win, which I love to hear, because that's something that we really advocate for within the podcast. Do you see that that's resonating more at the executive level today than perhaps it had done in the past?
I do. I do think that that's the case, and I think depends on the personality of the organization and the function. Mm-hmm. I think on the direct side of the house, it probably has taken a slower path than it has on the indirect side, simply because of the needs to supply mission critical materials, to the function. So I think the patience level is a little thinner there than it is on the indirect side. And so that's been my observation. And since over the last 10 years, my focus has been more on the indirect side mm-hmm. than the direct side. I think it's enabled me to take a path that was more relationship-based, win-win based, and more insightful into those kind of things.
Now, you've spent, I'd say, roughly half your career, I think, in consulting and half on the corporate side. Has being a consultant impacted your approach then as a practitioner?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's absolutely been instrumental in my development. So, learning the skills of a consultant, listening, note-taking, research, presenting findings, and driving implementations is critical skills, in my view, for a procurement professional. Mm-hmm. So my view is that procurement, if implemented correctly, is essentially an internal consultancy. Yeah. It's really what it is, right? And so meeting the needs of a stakeholder, understanding exactly what keeps those folks up at night, the skills of change management, and making sure that the stakeholder's agenda is what's driving the agenda between the procurement function and that of the stakeholder. Enables the function to stay closer to the function, as opposed to being, somebody that's in there to take over the business, tell you what to do, right. and to be a land grab for savings out of my budget. Those are the kinds of things that will keep people away from you more than bring them to your table. So
like showing up and saying, "Hey, I'm from procurement. This is how I'm going to help you," without really understanding in what the needs of the business are, as opposed to providing services that are so compelling that a stakeholder absolutely feels like they have to work with you because of the value that you bring for them.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you want to, your value proposition has to do with taking non-mission critical things mm-hmm. off of their table and incorporating those kinds of things inside, your organization's capacity and ability to deliver, while at the same time understanding those mission critical needs and making sure that they're catered to or adhered to in some way in terms of timeliness, being able to work within one's budget, and things like that. So I think it's a double-edged kind of a sword that you want to bring to the table.
There's something I wanted to just ask a little bit about. So you're CPO of the NBA, and for most of us, I'm sure listening to the show, big sports fans. I'm certainly no different. In fact, here in England, I'm in England at the moment. We just won the Cricket World Cup yesterday, so we're all very excited about that over here. As people who are involved in sport, you're always interested in understanding how sports leagues operate and work. From a professional perspective, certainly in your own profession, like procurement. So I'd love to know, how does procurement at the NBA work, or how does procurement in a professional sports league work? Are you supporting just the association, or do you do some support of the clubs, the teams within the league as well? Yeah,
it's an interesting business alignment here. So, from a visual point of view, for yourself and for the listeners, we would be a small circle that sits in the middle. Mm-hmm. The point guard in a sports analogy kind of a way. Yeah. And there's 30 professional teams around us. There's 30 G League or minor league teams around them, and then there's 12 WNBA teams. So these are concentric circles to which, me being in the middle, we are a service that supports the league entity only. Okay. So we operate really at the pleasure of the teams, the owners of the teams. Mm-hmm. And so everything that we do is not team specific, it's league specific. So, the creation of the replay center, the data centers, all of the technical things that go around that, the contracts that go in place to support the game itself, right? So we're sort of behind the curtain, and are instrumental in helping that production of the game of basketball and all of the internal functions that calculate the accounting and the basketball-related income and all the things that get shared back to the teams is done in this, concentric circle that sits in the middle. The opportunity to aggregate some of those spends around the 30 teams and the 30 G leagues is certainly there, but it's a more complicated model because each of the owners of the teams or the owners of the minor league teams could be a conglomerate or could have portfolio of companies behind them. And so their supply chain and the ability to aggregate things on a more beneficial level isn't always as one might think. So where those opportunities present themselves, they ask and we provide some help, and we try to make the agreements that we put in place available to them should they choose to access them.
Okay, now that makes complete sense. So like team owners have their own ecosystem, of companies or whoever it is that they work with just because of their business, and typically, they're obviously successful businessmen. So they're operating more at a club level to support their individual teams, but you're supporting everything that goes behind the scenes to ensure the game can go ahead.
Yeah, and I think the interesting difference that we have here is over the last almost 5 years now, 4.5 years, I've had the opportunity to build a function that has a global view from a strategic sourcing and operations, which is the data analytics and the procure-to-pay cycle. So I have a fundamental team that has a global reach, and that it's been my observation across some of the other major leagues, Major League Baseball, the NFL, NHL, is a more established function, as opposed to having one or two people that are overseeing procurement in these other leagues that is not as inculcated and as defined as what we've been able to build here at the NBA. So I think that it's a much different model here, and that gives us the ability to be more helpful to the teams if and when they ask or they choose to access our service.
Yeah, and I imagine as all sports leagues are right now looking to become more global brands, and having more activities and events in different locations all around the world, that the call then comes to you to help them actually enable that and make that happen. So you get the opportunity to work more globally with your suppliers as well than, what you ordinarily may think from a domestic league perspective.
Yeah, indeed.
So what I want to do today to dive into a little bit, and thank you for that. I know that I could dig deeper and deeper into there, but I also know that there's only so many things that you can really share. So I really appreciate you giving a little bit of context into the role of procurement within a sports organization. Honestly, the reason why I wanted to talk mostly today was because, you mentioned it kind of at the top of the interview, how you really think a little bit differently than the traditional procurement leader, I think. And that's demonstrated by the fact that you're a certified empowerment coach and a certified emotional intelligence practitioner. I wonder if you could share a little bit about what those are.
Yeah, it's again a pretty big differentiator in terms of my career path and how those kinds of things have allowed me to truly be the person and the leader that I am today. And so I'll give you just a little bit of a context about how this has all come to be. So back in 2002, I was right-sized from Deloitte Consulting, where I managed the East Coast region for supply chain procurement. And I was really set free to find my next adventure.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, I discovered life and executive coaching as a result of a misplaced postcard from my neighbor that came into my mailbox.
It's fate.
I delivered the... Yeah, it's funny how things happen, and at this point I know that there was no accident. That card was meant for me to be seen, but of course I didn't know it then, right? So I delivered the card, but the seed was planted, and I began to explore some things. I wasn't sure what I would do with it, but it intuitively felt like the right thing to do. So I joined a 12-month master's level kind of program from an international coach federation sanctioning school, and it profoundly changed my life by helping me understand how to reconcile things from the past, resist worry about things that have yet to happen that are future-oriented, and by doing all I can do today, right here and now, to stay in the moment, to give me the best, opportunity to make tomorrow the best it could be. Mm-hmm. And really that's a very, very powerful statement that is quite complicated to break down into parts, but is exactly what happened. So it was cathartic and eye-opening in the way I would describe it. I was so impressed by this that I became a partner in that coaching school, mm-hmm. and entered an entrepreneurial phase for the next 5 years of my life. And so what this has allowed me to bring really to my function today is understanding, the complexities that a human being travels through. And that when you are having a conversation with someone, whether it's my employees or a supplier, it's being mindful of the emotional state of things, mm-hmm. not only to be in control of my own self so that I can be present, I can hear clearly what, the concerns or the objections are of the supplier, but that I can be mindful of the emotional state of the person that I'm talking to.
Yeah.
And that's just an intuitive place to be. And so my objective in every conversation I have, whether it's through work or it's with my children or my loved ones or with my employees, is to be here and present in every conversation that I have, and allows me to connect with another person, mm-hmm. in a very meaningful way. And that's really the difference in all that I have learned and how I bring it to the table today.
Interesting. Now, I know that you have, you've in fact written about achieving our true potential. How do we achieve our true potential? What are some of the limiting beliefs that you see in procurement pros? And I think readers as well, because obviously you're pretty uniquely qualified to see those and to take a little bit of a different perspective because of the observations that you're making about the people around you.
I would say that the limiting belief that I see in most people, including procurement pros, is becoming preoccupied with a belief or beliefs that there's nothing that they can do to feel better about a particular circumstance that they may find themselves in. And I think about Albert Einstein, who said, essentially, paraphrasing here a bit, we can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when the problem was created.
Yeah.
And the point being that no one can solve a challenge within the confines of the challenge. So you have to really rise above that, right, and look in on that situation and see, is this the correct way that I can try to solve this? And so from a procurement perspective, if the advantage is to the buyer, then the challenge is a little bit less limited, right? But sometimes we find ourselves in situations where it's a seller's market. Mm-hmm. And how do you best overcome that? And so if you go into the conversation feeling that I'm in a less advantageous position, you have, by that virtue of that belief, limited yourself to solving it in the most, profound way that you can.
Yeah.
Right.
You want to get
you sort of limit yourself.
Right. Interesting. So mindset is such an important part of essentially being successful. That you see that is a driver of success.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And so, no matter what conversation you're entering into, if you are preoccupied in some way by believing that there is a challenge, mm-hmm. then you're not able to be in that moment and not worry about the challenge, but more profoundly state your position, listen to the opposing points to that position, and then find a win-win or a successful way through it.
Yeah.
Don't get caught up in the challenge, but get caught up in the ability to hear it and overcome it.
Now, one of the challenges I think we have as procurement professionals is, and I think all professionals, it's not just limited to procurement professionals, is, that doing things differently has an element of risk associated with it. And we often want to take the path that has the least risk or where there's the least potential for reputational damage, whatever that may look like. And it's upon team leaders to create an environment where their team feel comfortable in doing things differently, challenging those limiting beliefs. And I wonder if you could just share some, I don't think there's a silver bullet by any stretch of the imagination, but perhaps some tips of how, from a leadership perspective, you've seen ways to create that safe space for team members.
Yeah, I'll share a bit about how I handle my direct reports, in a second. But essentially, it's understanding that staying in the moment and letting go of the urge to relive the past or worry about the future is really the path to tranquility. Mm-hmm. It's the path to peace and being mindful and just living and enjoying where we are, because the only thing we truly have is this moment. You don't have a minute ago, and you've not yet experienced a minute from now. Yeah. And so if you stay focused in either of those time zones, you're going to lose the ability to be as in control as you can possibly be in whatever conversation you're having. And I often equate it to the concept of the zone, air quotes, included here, for athletes. And so many of us who are amateurs in golf and soccer and God knows whatever else sport wonder, how does that athlete perform in his or her best way in a most critical moment? Mm-hmm. And I believe that's because they have brought their entire focus and the very best that they could be into a particular moment where it's a career-defining opportunity. Rather than worry about, can I make that shot or kick that goal, I don't worry about that. I actually just bring all of my self-being into that moment and all of my God-given skills to accomplish it, right? Yeah. So it's about being in the moment. And so I think about that as a concept, and things are going to happen, right, albeit good or bad, and there's no way to stop that. And all anyone can do is control their reactions to what's happened, and get away from be too caught up in the blaming and characterizing and becoming a victim to the event. Yeah. So instead, take the time to examine why what's happened has happened, learn the lesson that's associated with that event, and move on such that you don't contribute to it happening again. Mm-hmm. And the funny thing about life, if we don't learn from the lessons, they're likely to repeat in another form. Right. And life has a way of testing first and providing the lessons after, which is a little counter than what we try to learn.
Yeah, as long as you take the learnings from them, I guess that's all you can do from those lessons that you get, along the way, isn't it?
Yeah, indeed.
Now, is this because it's obviously it's easier said than done, to really try and encourage yourself to think in these ways, and to rid yourself of some limiting beliefs, and to not necessarily think about what has happened and what may happen. Now, is that something that an individual can do on their own, or do you find that the help of a coach or the help of support is very powerful in helping you as an individual kind of come to that state of mind?
Yeah, I do believe that a person, so emotional intelligence and and learning to live a more empowering life is absolutely possible to be learned. It's not, you're not hard coded to live a life of misery or whatever it is that's going on. And so part of what I mentioned actually in the last question was to tell you a little bit about how I handle my own direct reports, which I think comes to the point here, which is I offer every one of my direct reports an hour of my time every month. And it's very similar to a coaching conversation. The first half hour is about their performance plan, their key performance objectives, and key things they need to accomplish. How is that going? And what can I do to help? And where they might be stuck? So that I don't have one or two performance conversations a year, I have 12. Yeah. And so the 12th one, or the 11th one, depending on how many you have, is a very easy conversation to have, because I have given my time to help them be successful. And in the end, that helps me be successful as well, but most importantly for them. And then the second half hour is for them to feel comfortable and free to talk about whatever it is they want to talk about, because it's a safe zone. Mm-hmm. It's not a judgment zone. I don't tell them what to do, and this is not a digging into their personal life, but it's silly to think that a human being comes to work and as soon as they pass through the door, they leave all of those challenges out on the curb and they come to work and they can be productive. So because it's a safe place and they have confidence and they feel secure and safe talking to me, it allows us to have a relationship and a bond that's much stronger than they probably have ever had, and one that is incredibly important to me to be able to pay it forward. Mm-hmm. So that's the kind of environment I look to provide here, not only for my direct reports, but how I interact with my colleagues across the NBA. Yeah. I actually teach a course here that is consistent with the book that I wrote, Don't Believe Everything You Think. And I get, tremendous reviews from this because it's a different kind of a course that doesn't teach negotiation or accounting or subject matter skills, but it has to do with understanding human behavior and the faulty thinking that oftentimes holds us from achieving, success and tranquility in their life. So I take a great deal of pride in being able to help a person think about things differently, just turning on a light and helping them understand things from a different point of view.
Yeah. Now, I'd love to understand a little bit about how, the application of your thinking into procurement itself and into, structuring kind of a procurement group. I know you talked a little bit about how you work with your team in creating a safe space, but does your experience mean that you look to hire in a different kind of way? Like, do you look for different attributes? Are you looking for softer, and I hate really using the term soft skills because I think it undermines the skills that are really very important. But those kind of skills versus the harder traditional technical skills. Are you looking for different people in procurement than perhaps what some other folks who are building procurement teams are?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very interesting point from the environment we have as hiring managers as well, right? So today we see unemployment that's below 4% here in the U.S. And that's something that's hasn't been this way for maybe 50 years. Mm-hmm. And so the talent pool is a lot smaller. And so the people that you're trying to attract, and everybody wants to attract a high potential person, is a bit more difficult to accomplish. And so my view at this is what attracts a person to an organization. Of course, brand imaging, and the NBA is great at doing that. We have a great deal of people that come to the table here. So that's a big plus for us. And I believe that a person comes to the table looking for some different things today. Obviously a comp and benefits, of course, is important, but I don't know that it's the most important thing today. So how a person perceives the organization. Mm-hmm. Is it doing something for the greater, mankind purpose? Yeah. What's the role that they're going to be playing once that they're here? And then, more importantly, from my point of view, is how are they at understanding emotional intelligence? Mm-hmm. How do they look at, difficult or critical conversations? How well are they able to maintain their own emotional control and be aware of the other person's emotional control? And how well are they at, giving a smile and being a person that works well in every aspect of the organization? So, to your point, obviously, this critical skills in terms of their subject matter expertise are important, but I look also at their human skills and how they're going to be able to participate in an environment that is very fast-paced, oftentimes is not so open to hearing a very complicated conversation and how somebody can help them. And so to be able to overcome that and be able to communicate effectively is the skills that I look for every bit as important as the technical mm-hmm. skills. And I can tell you that I'm very happy with the group that I've put together here at the NBA, and I think the NBA takes a very forward-looking view. It's not an easy process to go through interviews here, and so it takes the time to look at things in a much more different way, which I think is the right way to look at it.
Yeah. What are some of the things that you look for? Like, are there certain signals that you pick up from a candidate that suggest to you that they have the emotional intelligence that you're looking for?
Yeah, so it's the calmness and the awareness of being in the conversation as opposed to remembering the things that they wanted to say from a script point of view. And you ask them different questions about their life's experience and how they handle particular things, and under this scenario, how might you go about things? And so those things aren't so different, but really it's being cognizant of the energy that's being presented to you in that conversation. Mm-hmm. And that's an intuitive kind of a thing. So you're not looking for anything specific. You're looking, or at least I'm looking, to feel calm and that the person is right there in that moment with me, and how they're expressing themselves off script is really why I'm looking to discern.
So I want to touch a little bit on change management, because in procurement, I think we're in the business of selling change, and we often, as we talked about earlier, we try and force change sometimes rather than influence and persuade. I wonder if you could share just some of the tactics that have been most successful for you in helping you drive change. Whether it's in a transformation program or whether it's just to influence a sourcing decision, because you're obviously taking a somewhat of a different tact than perhaps a more traditional procurement professional would do to those challenges.
Yeah, an excellent question indeed. And I think first and foremost, for me, when I got here, I introduced myself to my key stakeholders. I wanted them to understand me, what I'm about, how I manage myself, and how I will manage the team. And my objective is to earn trust in a way that is comfortable and effective for them. Because at the end of the day, it's relationship management. And as a buyer and a seller, people do business with people they like. Yeah. And so my internal stakeholders, if they understand me, if they feel comfortable with me, if they know that they can trust what's going on, they're going to be knocking on my door more than I have to worry about knocking on theirs, right? So the objective is to earn trust in a way that's comfortable and effective for them, and using emotional intelligence allows me to be really effective in this area. And once this has been accomplished, I ask them, what's important for them and how can my team help them to be successful? Yeah. This is where I'm a change agent, and each of my people will become change agents as they go through the organization. As we work effectively with those key stakeholders and their subordinates, they become change agents as well throughout their particular departments, and it all works together in a concentric, kind of a way. So sometimes in terms of projects where a sourcing decision is controversial, which happens, I'll act as a mediator in that sense, that I support a fact-based discussion and listen to all sides. Hearing everyone out is important when there are differing opinions. Once done, you recap the pros and the cons again of the options and ask for another conversation or a vote. And if at that point consensus has not been reached, the business has to make a decision, and sometimes we have to make a decision based upon all the facts at hand, but everyone knows that they've been heard. And, the decision that's in the best interest of the organization is what's being made. So that's change management. That's helping a person have a voice, making sure that they feel understood, and at the same time, agreeing with the decision at the end of that consensus allows people to go forward and say, this is a very fair process, and I think one that you should embrace. And so that's how I look at it. Yeah, and it's so important you mentioned there about kind of mediating sometime, of having the trust for the rest of the folks in the organization, or the rest of the folks in the room making that decision, that you're there to help the organization make the best decision. You're not there to make the best decision for procurement. And that's a big difference, exactly.
In how I imagine that you and your team are perceived, and also those teams that are most successful, why they're able to influence and persuade is because folks realize that, again, they're there for the organization, they're not there for procurement.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, one of the things that that happen, depending upon, how strong procurement is been placed in an organization. Again, on the direct side, I think it's a bit of a different, animal.
Yeah.
And how forceful procurement needs to be, or how instrumental procurement is in making a decision. That's a very, very delicate balance that I think the more creative procurement leader can be instrumental in the decision without being authoritative in that decision. And I think that's the key to being accepted and inculcating change.
Well, I know it's about time to wrap up, Joe, so I have one final question. And this is just really kind of a reflective question. If there's a piece of advice you would give to your 30-year-old self, you're kind of working your way up the career ladder, what would it be?
Yeah, boy. All of us wish we could go back and make a couple of changes, right, in a 30-year-old self. And so, interesting question. I would say to myself in this case, pay attention to your intuition. It will serve you well going forward. Your intuition is very strong, and you don't maybe not know it at the 30-year-old self, but it is strong, and it'll serve you well going forward. Speak your truth when appropriate, and look to avoid career limiting discussions and conversations, but embrace the career defining ones. I would say that would be it.
Yeah, interesting. Well, I want to thank you so much for sharing, some of your experience and your perspective. I think that, in my mind, this is certainly the future direction of the procurement professional. That we can rely on all the technical skills and the hard skills all we want, but ultimately we're only really going to be able to drive change if we're building, powerful human connections. And without that, we can be the best negotiator in the world, or we can know the most about a particular market, but it doesn't matter because nobody wants to listen to us, or nobody wants to hear our point of view.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think, the key difference in being a manager versus a leader is understanding, the difference of emotional intelligence and how to lead and motivate rather than manage. Mm-hmm. And that's the key difference, I think, for a CPO to get a strategic seat at whatever table it is that one talks about. It's about how you're being understood, mm-hmm. and the value of exploring conversations with you. I think that's a key difference.
Yeah. Well, if listeners would like to connect with you, what would be the best way, and they want to do so after the show, what would be the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, people can reach me through LinkedIn, or through my email at jpostiglione@nba.com. And that's the best way for find that people can interact with me.
Okay, perfect. What I'll do is I'll include a link to your LinkedIn profile on our show notes. I'll also include a link to the book that you wrote. I read the book before we had the interview, and it really digs deep into some of these topics. So I'd really recommend anybody who has enjoyed the conversation today, who wants to learn a little bit more, to go and read the book that Joe wrote, which is Don't Believe Everything You Think, Change the Way You Feel by Changing the Way You Think. And I'm going to include a link to that in the show notes as well, so everyone can go and find that if they wish. So those show notes are going to be on artofprocurement.com. So just go to artofprocurement.com/podcast. You will find this interview with Joe amongst the published podcasts that we have on there, or you can just search as well for Joe using the search functionality on the site. So Joe, one last time, I just want to thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a pleasure to invite you and to talk to you on the podcast today.
Thank you, Phil. I appreciate the invitation and being able to share some of these thoughts with the listeners. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Hi there. I want to thank you for tuning in to today's podcast. You can check out all of our back catalogue at artofprocurement.com/podcast, where you can also subscribe to our newsletter to make sure that you never miss an episode. And if you found value in today's show, I'd love if you would tell a peer, or perhaps go and rate and review by going to artofprocurement.com/review. Word of mouth really is the best way to help the podcast grow, and if you're able to do either one of those things, I would truly appreciate it.